what's up, guys? I want to welcome you back to another episode of Street Theology. It is your boy, Pastor Adrian here, episode 45. Episode 45. I don't know who wears number 45, but that's something.
Well, we almost got, like...
What?
We almost are at more podcasts than U.S. presidents. Like, we're at 46. Biden's 46. We're almost there. I mean, maybe next time we'll just call this like the presidential.
Wow. So you trying to say this? So you trying to say this is Donald Trump?
Okay. Why are we on that topic?
Hey, that's what I'm saying. This is a MAGA cast. Like, what we doing here? Hey, what we doing?
We talk about leadership.
I know, right?
We're finna flame.
That is a good topic. But no, episode 45 today. And the voices you hear, we are joined. First time we all been together.
Oh,
man, this is about to be a lot of fun today. Definitely. Hopefully, we have the ability to get fired on this episode. So we will make sure we block this from our elders podcast downloads. And so I am joined to the right of me. If you're watching here on, if you're listening, but if you're watching on YouTube, man, joined by the one and only Trey Zoda. Trey, what's happening, man?
You know, Testosterone Thursday. It's got all the guys on the pod today.
Straight. It straight is. So again, I saw your desk today. Trey, man, Trey, you had two monsters on the desk today. Monster Energy's deep. You know what I'm saying? Trey must got a lot of work going on, man. You all right?
You know, you just got to stimulate the creativity, make sure that.
Oh my gosh. I hope Faith ain't listening to this. Yeah. All right. His wife. All right. As well, Mr. Steady Eddie, the man who I like to kick the ball out to. When I penetrate pitch, he's over there with the corner three. He'll lift up to the slot, make a three as well. The Clay Thompson of the podcast. Derek Hayes, what's happening, sir?
What's up? If y'all wondering if I caught any of that, what he just said, the answer is no. I have no idea what he just talking about.
I'll have to explain that to you later. I'll have to explain it to you later, man. A lot of dudes made a lot of money making corner threes.
Sweet.
You know what I'm saying? The Bruce Bowen the podcast. You know what I'm saying?
3D.
3D, man. 3D. And then voice that you hear someone who is, man, who doesn't come on a podcast a lot, but got a lot of wisdom.
Oh, man.
Man. Rock Hill, South Carolina's finest. Finest. You know, there's a lot of, and people don't realize there's a lot of athletes coming out of Rock Hill. A lot of athletes start. Really? Yes. A lot of Rock. Wow. South Carolina is a hotbed for athletics.
Football City, USA in 2010.
Yep.
Is that right?
It was.
Football City, USA.
Pastor Jamie, what's going on, man?
I mean, you know, nothing much. Happy to be here.
There you go. Hey,
glad to be here.
There we go, man. Shout out to the late Todd Williams. You know I'm just happy to be here. So, man, but no, we are really excited. Hey, Street Theology, we exist simply for this, man, to bring bring theology really down to a street level. Again, we believe in this idea here of innovative reconcilers. We believe we're called to really lead and help launch a movement of innovative reconcile people to connect to God, one another, their meaningful work in the earth. And what we want to do is really take theology and take topics and bring it down to a street level. And so we are excited you guys are listening. Hey, if this podcast is helpful for you, man, make sure you write a review. Man, give us a 5-star rating on your Apple iTunes or your Apple podcast, wherever you get your podcast from. Man, let us know what you think about the pod, and we would love to read your review at some point. So, man, we are excited today. We're going to jump into a really interesting topic today. So, Pastor Derek, man, why don't you just throw the topic up?
Episode 45, we can get AKA Donald Trump episode anyway. But you know, it's the thing that I think, man, that we do very well, man, and we have a really heart to see here at Engage, not just at Engage, but wherever you are, wherever you find yourself, this idea of leadership. And so we're going to talk about leadership renovation. And so even now, when I think about leadership, we kind of, tongue in cheek talking about Trump or whatever, but man, even here in Tallahassee, man, just losing a great leader and Coach Bobby Bowden. And so, man, this idea where he impacted the world. As a titan in our city. And so many people were affected by him and his leadership. And those people now are all over the place, as an example of what we want to see here at Engage. And so, man, we're going to talk about this idea of leadership renovation. Pastor Adrian, Tuesday, man, we had our kind of our own, leadership development stuff with the staff here. And you talked about this idea of leadership renovation, and it was powerful and it was great. And so we want to, man, that stuff, and by the way, that stuff will be coming out to some of you guys real soon, but we kind of want a deeper dive, man. So let's talk about that. What does that mean? And we'll kind of jump it off from there. Yeah, no, I'm going to dive into it. But before we do that, because you brought up a great point, again, to talk about Coach Bowden. And so again, with Pastor Jamie actually playing for the league, we talk about leadership. Let me ask you this question. As somebody who played for him, what was, in your opinion, what was the leadership thing that you took from Coach Bowden?
Yeah, I mean, so many great things to take from Coach Bowden. I would say the most important thing I probably took from him was how he did it his way. In a time where whenever he was coming up through coaching, he was very much so in the era where the mentality was a certain way, toughness, you don't show a certain type of love to your players and this and that. And he was very much so like caring about his guys first.
Yep.
You know, he was a man of faith, so he was very much so, man, I care about their spiritual, I care about their souls, I care about them first and foremost.
Yeah.
You know, now we hear that a lot, you know, when it comes to coaching, but back then that wasn't necessarily the case.
Yep.
And so he was kind of like a pioneer in bringing that forth, and just how many guys got affected and had such a positive impact on. I'm pretty sure we'll hear a whole bunch of that tomorrow and Saturday as his memorial is happening. And so I would say, man, like being secure and going about it the way like God's put on your heart to go about it. So, yeah.
I know one of the things, just talking about him being such a great leader, but like especially the faith aspect of him just being a believer. I had no idea until, you know, we found out that Coach Bowden passed this past weekend that my brother-in-law actually got saved listening to Coach Bowden, like at a time he was coming out. It was a faith-based message, and it was like, gave his life away that night. So
wow, yeah, man. And Mark Rick, former coach, University of Georgia, Miami. Mark Rick. I mean, he says all the time. He's like, man, he came to faith because of Coach Bowden and the lives he impacted. And I remember hearing this said one time, is that you can tell the impact you made. You can tell the impact that you made by how many people, you know, not how much money you made, not how many, you know, maybe followers you have on a social media platform, but man, how many people actually show up to your funeral, you know, and the influence that you have. And again, that's what's going to happen. I mean, you know, they're holding Coach Bowden's, you know, again, his funeral is going to be at the, you know, the Civic Center, and it's going to be sold out and all the stuff. I mean, you got guys flying in from everywhere, you know, from California to everywhere. And you know, you're a great leader when you have, I mean, when some men have not been coached by him in over 25, 30 years. And as soon as the news happened, I mean, like, you know, you come about grown men breaking down and crying, you know, and really, you know, because of what he meant to them. And more than anything else, the culture he created. Because again, Coach Bowden had over, you know, you have, you know, 100 some odd players out there. It's not like, you know, I know you probably, you know, could say it ain't like, you know, you talking to Coach Bowden every day.
No.
You know what I'm saying? But it's the appreciation of the culture that he actually created. You know what I mean? You know, would that be accurate?
Yes, very accurate. And I will say he knew almost every player's name and where they were from. I mean, up until the time he retired. He would pass you in the hall, he would say your name and say, yeah, you're from such and such place. And that was just right there. You know, how he cares for his player, how he really took in home visits that he went to, where he would go to their town and city. He would say things about what he remembered from visiting them. And so it's just his heart and how he cared for his guys.
He did, and I think that was always, I'll never forget my, and we can move on, one of my favorite Coach Bowden stories ever, man, because one thing about Coach Bowden, too, is very funny. And one of the things about Coach Bowden, this is during the, you know, back in the day, the Epic, when two Florida State players got some free, you know, some free Tommy Hilfiger and polo gear and whatever, and it was a big thing, and I'll never forget, we had a recruit in, you know, playing basketball, and so the recruit came in, and he was wearing, you know, this 7-foot kid from Illinois, white kid, he had a Tommy Hilfiger, you know, Tommy Hilfiger is really big, and he had the Tommy Hilfiger on. And so we're walking into the facility. He's on his visit, and Coach Bowden's walking out. And so, you know, we see, you know, it's Coach Bowden, man. At that point in time, I mean, you know, like, he's a legend. So everybody wanted to meet him. So, and he was so personable. And so people sat there like, and then we introduced him, hey, Coach Bowden, you know, introduced him to the player. And then Coach Bowden's walking through his car, just like, you know, and again, it's like a national thing. Like, two of his best players, you know what I'm saying, aren't going to be able to play. This caused all this stuff. And just like the piece he had about it, he cracked a joke. Coach Bowden looks at him, he's like, oh, so you be hanging out with some of my guys, huh? And they just keep going to the car. We like lost it. Like, it's a big national issue. Everybody questioning him, and my man just is good. Hey, cool. He was about to jump to the he jumped to the Mercedes Benz, just head to the house. Hey, and so, but no, I appreciate that. But man, going into this idea of leadership renovation, one of the things that actually that sparked this was the fact that I was reading a book by about Warren Bennis, and one of the things that he talked about in the book is the fact of how leaders many times, like, man, we're shaped, our leadership is shaped by others. So much so. And it made me think through, like, and then all of a sudden I started thinking about, like, yeah, it's so true, and how you have to kind of unearth that or whatever. And then I started thinking about, man, I've had to live in a lot of, like, I've done a lot of renovations in a sense, like, moving into buildings or into a home, or, my wife and running her business. She's living, she had 2 or 3 different studios. They had to renovate it. Our church, we had to renovate it, whatever. And thinking about what was really interesting about it is so true in what he said. You have to deconstruct those, or, pull those things down, because, man, every renovation we went into, and I know, Pastor Jamie, you deal with stuff with real estate. You walk in, you're like, man, what was this for? Like, what I'm saying? Somebody had a vision for that building, and then you got to tear that stuff out, or you can keep that stuff if it can be helpful for you. And again, especially if you've been in a building that's had like 6, 7, 8, different people who've occupied the building, man, you just find all type of stuff that people, sometimes they don't do a good job, and they just cover something up, and then you start unearthing. I mean, what is this? That wasn't from the last owners. And so you have to literally take things out that's not useful, and then build back for the vision that ultimately I feel like God has for you. And so this idea of leadership renovation is that, man, have we actually sat and thought and evaluated why we think the way we think, why we lead the way that we lead, how we lead and again, this is not just about leadership in an organization or in a business or whatever, but, man, how we lead our families, man, how do we lead ourselves? Like, how do we, like, leadership is an important thing, and how do we actually do that? So that was kind of where it came from, is this idea of actually deconstructing and thinking about my own life, how I had to go back. And again, when I say that, deconstructing, tearing things down, but also when you renovate something, you just don't tear it down, you build it back up. You're not just stripping the paint off the wall and don't put nothing back on. And so that's kind of what I've been, we're going to go over the next few weeks, just kind of unearthing that. So it's kind of started there. And so I guess I would ask you guys, when you heard it, what kind of, again, as all you guys as young leaders, like, what hit you when you heard that?
Yeah, I'll kind of go first. And going off of the example you gave about renovation in real estate, a lot of things that I see a lot going into homes is when it comes to the flooring, right? You will see the different trends that were in style with how many different floors have been put down
that's a good point.
On the slab, right? So back in 60s, 70s, you're going to see a laminate type sheet. And then 70s, 80s, you'll see tile on it. And then now you're going to see some type of wood flooring or vinyl. But when you're doing renovations and you ripping up those floors, I just think it's a parallel between when you think about, hey, how you form a foundation of, man, how am I going to be? How am I going to be as a leader? How am I going to be as this? A lot of what's influenced is, hey, what is kind of trendy at the time? Wow. So, hey, man, the people who are getting the platform, the people who have a following or influence level that is kind of what I desire to have, what are some of the things they're doing? What are some things they're saying? What are some of the places they're going? What are some of their mind trends and sets? And so I think it's vital to pull up all those different floorings that you have and get down to the slab and the foundation and say, man, what type of flooring is it that is for me? What is the type of flooring that's called to be laid on my foundation? And so that was a lot of things that I thought about.
I want to know, because I want to ask you guys this question that goes to that. So when he talks about, like, different seasons, right? Different years, like, different type of flooring. Do you think that that's okay or not? Like how you said, man, in a house, man, you had the tile flooring, you had the wood flooring, just because of whatever the wave may be, right? But sometimes in leadership, like, do you think some of the leadership things that you lead in, is it okay to have that based on the era that you're living in, or do you think, no, this is just my base needs to be this, and then I don't ever really add? I don't know if that's making sense.
I mean, it makes sense to me. I mean, and I think that I think as long as it's not to say that, hey, as long as it's effective, then it's fine. It's just the idea of, well, what is it that I actually need? What do I need to be effective? And hopefully, to quote unquote, the flooring that's down there was the most helpful thing at the time. I mean, obviously. So, but in terms of leadership, it's not as you could look down and say, like, oh, you're just doing what's trendy. But I mean, I think there's a tension to walk in with that. It's like, well, I mean, maybe it's just that this is the thing that's most effective right now. That, man, years ago, you can't lead that way now. And so I think there's going to be tension in it, sure. But and the real tension is like, because you've got inner reasons why this feels good. Like I might want to catch this quote unquote leadership wave because I value significance. I want to be, all that kind of thing. And you're going to have to walk through it because what I've come to learn is, listen, God is going to keep healing me on the way. I've got a whole bunch of hangups of the reason why I want to do leadership, and to act like those are not there, you'll never leave. You'll get frozen if you just hung up on like, well, I can't lead because I got all these motivations behind there. You know what I mean? So hopefully it's effective.
Yeah.
No, I 100% agree with everything you guys have said. And I was thinking, like, as Pastor Jamie was talking and you asked that question, one of the things that I was kind of reflecting on was like, okay, as I've looked back in different leadership positions I've been in, there have been times where it's looked a lot different. Like one of the jokes that we kind of always make around here is you need to motivate, not intimidate. And there's been times when I've 100% leaned more into that other side of like, hey, you're in the military. There's a certain way you got to like make stuff happen, that kind of thing. And then I think the thing, whenever it boils down to, like Pastor Derek said, is just realizing like, what are the abilities that God's given me? What are the things that have been solid the entire time? What's the stuff that I haven't lost? And then realizing that, okay, those are where like my true leadership strengths probably lie, and trying to continue to work on weaknesses, continuing to ask for healing along the way, but also to like really lean into those places that are strong. And then I think ultimately too, like you're going to get a house inspected. So asking people around you just to come in and say, hey, where do you feel like I can improve? Where are growth points for me in this season? And just like having patience for each other as we're all moving ahead.
Yeah, because I think, one of my thoughts goes to is even, I love the analogy of what Pastor Jamie said about the flooring, but then when you go down a little bit deeper, at the end of the day, the most important thing, when you go into a home is like the slab, right? It's like it's the foundation.
Yep.
That's the most important thing. So what I think about sometimes is that I think that there needs to be, I think your foundation, many times in leadership, and then going back to what you said about Coach Bowden, there were certain things, you always talk about, faith, family, football. That was like three things that never, that was kind of, and anybody talked about Coach Bowden, even since then, they've said that. Faith, family, football. Everybody said that. So those were three things, values, right, for him. So now, Coach Bowden did it his way. He did it that, but throughout the years, there's different ways they ran the offense, different ways they ran the defense, and that's kind of adding to the floor. So I think what you have to get to is like, man, what are the values? Like, what are what are values that should be, if you're a Jesus follower, as an innovative reconciler, that's birthed out of Scripture, and what are those values? And then I think that those may not change, but then the ways that the leadership plays out changes. Just like as a coach, things change in system. Your system changes based on the wave, or really even maybe a more effective way of even leadership. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Like the game of basketball has completely changed since when I played basketball, and it's like, man, I think it's a more effective way, but some of the values are still the same. So I think that's one that's important, I think, for everyone. So when it comes to your family, if you're listening or watching, like, do you have values? Like, do you have family values that matter to your family? Because your style may be different from you and your spouse, but at the end, man, we're making sure we're putting these values, inside of our.
Actually, you know what? That's a good one, Pastor Agent. I want to dive into that a little bit, because we've talked about the idea like your values are not what you want them to be. Yeah. And so it's almost a little bit about like this idea of kind of like let your life speak a little bit. Can you talk a little bit about like how do you go about picking I'm even saying picking values. Yeah. What does that process look like in terms of what your true values are? How did you get them, and how are you going to really identify them versus saying, you know what, we're going to be responsible. Yeah, that's a good value. You know what I mean? Like,
No, I think it goes back to even when we talked about, like, when I asked you guys when we talk about leadership, like one of the first things I said, man, you got to do with any renovation, right? You got to examine. I think it goes to what you said. It's it's Parker J. Palmer. It's like the book, like, it's like let your life speak. I think many times your values that what's been put inside of you have already been like some of them have already been there. I think this is my belief. Now, I'm not saying this is where I can, theologically it points here in Scripture, but this is just my belief of just, and what I can see and what I've seen in life. I think there are certain values that God has actually put inside of human beings, right? And I think that there are things that come out. I think also how you do it. So I think you have to examine. So I think there's some values that have always kind of been there. So like diversity, reconciliation, like the idea of diversity has always been a value because I've always lived that way. It's always been a value. The other one is this though, but one that hasn't always been a value is authenticity. But that came out of examining pain. Because I was suffocated in the sense of like feeling like, you guys have heard my story enough, but like, so now authenticity came out of me going through that. So I found a value underneath the pain as I examine, right? I think other things too, why you have to examine is because, man, sometimes there may be values that your family, your parents put in you that you can carry because it really is a value. Or there's sometimes value that, man, that's not good for me because maybe that was out of their own pain or whatever. So I think how you do it, you have to examine and say, man, here's one thing. What makes you good and bad, what gets you excited? But here's the other thing too. What's something that happens where I'm talking about it like gets you like mad? Cause see, that's sometimes we don't talk about that. Like what gets you like, hold on, no, I don't like that. Like that sometimes that be where you like, yo, I'm about to fight somebody on this. A lot of times that could be if you're willing to go, it could be like, okay, but ask yourself why does that bother me like that? So like a value of my wife is like justice. Like Wendy, like it's a value, like man, like to people to be treated equitably and fair, it's like it's a value. I'm talking about like if it don't happen, I mean, she is ready to like burn things down. When she sees somebody like taking advantage or not be, dude, it is like, I mean, it's something that's like, it stirs up in her and she wants to fix it. But I think that's a value. And I think that's important because so many times what we'll do with anger, especially, we talk about this in the Christian world, when it comes to anger, we're always just like, oh no, I can't feel that way. I can't feel it. Sometimes no, it's speaking to something deeper, but are we willing to be curious and compassionate and go a little bit deeper to feel? So I think honestly, it's an examination. It's an examination of like, man, what are you passionate about? What do you naturally do? What maybe gets your emotions going? I think that's the way you actually can find it. And I think when you do that, then you start to build your life like out of that. You start to build your life out of those things. And I think when you can do that, that's a good foundation to actually have. Yeah.
And I think one of the ways that, just like what you mentioned, Pac, is how those things are formed is when you're examining like how have you been impacted personally by values that you felt just growing up, whether good or bad. So just like Pastor Adrian just mentioned, authenticity came out of like feeling something negative. Yeah. As far as like being squished and having this personality kind of being pushed to the side, realizing like, that's not good. You need to be authentic, and that came from something that wasn't necessarily a good thing. But then also it might be, man, I've experienced some really good feelings, some really good situations from people being generous to me. So that's going to be I think it depends on how you've been affected is also something that helps create or something that can help you identify, hey, what are my values going to be? And I think the other important thing is there's no right or wrong values to base your foundation off of, just really the right and important thing is making sure it's something that's authentic to you, you know, and that's what's going to really lead people, right? Because they're going to be drawn to, man, that person really authentic and genuine in what they promote, what they preached. A lot why Coach Bowden had a legacy that he has is because of it was who he was, and so I think one, pay attention to how you've been affected by values, good or bad, and then be that. Don't think that there's a right or wrong way to go about it.
Yeah, here's one thing I would say about like, I want to ask you guys to stop. One thing I think about when you talk about values and you talk about building this, man, this idea that I realize in my life sometime, that the older I get, one of the biggest things that was hard for me to find values is I felt like, man, at the time I was a value hypocrite. Here's what I mean by being a value hypocrite. That things I deeply value, sometimes I don't live up to. And how can I talk about that if I don't live up to it? Yeah. Like I want, because you really think about it. Because it's like, I mean, there are certain things that, man, like we preach about. Like, man, the idea of, man, being a non-anxious presence, the idea of bringing peace somewhere, not being angry, man, the idea of, man, not lusting, not da-da-da. But I'm like, all those things have like happened in my life, even if I preach them. And it's like, man, some people like, so it's really hard. So I don't even know where I want to go with that, but it's like the idea of like, do you guys ever think about like, has that ever stopped you, like makes you question, makes you move forward? Like, do you feel like, man, I'm a hypocrite of these values sometimes?
Oh man, especially like for me, especially noticing like in high school, college, especially, and then even more after becoming a Jesus follower in college, it was just like, man, I'm gonna clam up, I'm gonna shut down because I'm like, who am I to, you know what I mean? Who am I to say these things? And I ain't completely there. I don't have any, you almost feel like you're robbed of the right to, to say something. So man, it's definitely for sure.
Yeah.
I mean,
I know for Faith and I, being fiscally responsible has always been one. But then end of the month, go to check that budget. And it's like, hey, we got to eat out less. Or at the same end, it's like one of the things that Faith and I both feel really strongly about is being hospitable and having people in our house and having people around and feel comfortable. And then there's plenty of times it's Saturday and it's like we're supposed to have people over and all that. I'm like, Faith, you need to call them and tell them they can't come over anymore.
Yes. No, that's right.
Man, that's interesting to see how how that can kind of play out, the having a revelation and understanding that, man, I don't live out these values. So it can kind of cause like a shell that you kind of mentioned, Pastor Derek. And then also I think for me, when I think about it, it's like, that been in that same area. But I think it played out for me and it came out in a way of like self-righteousness, so I had to create I do this, and this. So it's okay. You know what I'm saying? Like it's
looking at the works. Like
yes. So it's okay that I didn't live up to it here, but I'm still doing it here, and it just kind of compounds and helps bring like a false sense of confidence, a false sense of security, right? So it's just the dynamics of how that can play out.
Yeah, I think part of it, and I think part of it is just understanding this. I think one of the greatest ways that I tell people you can show values, and it's not that you don't you're going to live up to them perfectly, but I think one of the greatest things if it's a value or a thing as a leader is that when you don't live up to that value, you're willing to admit that you don't live up to that value, to repent of that, and then be able to move on. Like, for example, it matters to me, to, for my children when it comes to the idea of authority in the right way, healthy, because again, I think the Bible, there's, again, in a world that's very much so pushed against it, but there's times where my kids have seen me not respond properly to whatever, if it's story, if it's all of a sudden, if I'm somewhere and, again, if I'm if I'm driving, you see a police officer, you know what I'm saying? And it's seeing them, they pull somebody over, they probably speeding, and, I may say something slick. Man, they always pulling somebody over, you know what I'm saying? They must have got, black people, they got a quota to meet this month. You know what I'm saying? Stuff like that.
They out here today.
They out here today.
Black people love
black people
see one cop, man. They out here today.
Hey, see the cop in 3,000 mile, boy. They out here. Y'all be careful out there. But no, but what happens though, honestly, is, but then I'll say something like that. And then sometimes I look at my kids like, hey, that's not okay. And it's because, why? Because I want them to do it. And that doesn't mean that I'm perfect. Because I think sometimes even as parents, I think as leaders, and that's one thing I try. I don't know how, I feel like I do a decent job with you guys here is that, why I try to invite in and say, hey, here's where I struggle. Here's where I mess up. Here's where I'm not great at. Here's where I mess up. Try to apply, I apologize. I should have done this better. Because I actually think that what you talk about foundationally, what was built, I think, you talk about from the generation before us, like baby boomers, it was man, you got everything together. And I think, okay, I get that there's a level of professionalism you have to have, but how that's crept into the church, has been this reality that man, it goes against what Paul says. That in my weakness, Christ is made strong. That doesn't mean I don't share everything that's going on in my life from the pulpit or whatever. But the one thing I made a decision on when I was going to preach, I'm because when I actually got behind the curtain of people who I really respect and leading and start saying hold on the stage, y'all say all this, but then I'm getting behind the stage. I'm oh, y'all as jacked up as all of us. I just made a decision. I'm not going to portray that because, man, I think it built such a false it builds this false construct of people feeling like they're chasing after something, and when they don't hit it, like, I mean, I'm telling you, man, I get people be up there, man, you got to walk this way in purity and holiness, and not out of a place of love and saying, no, we know, but it's don't challenge sin, challenge that. And that's what I was saying. But then it's like the same dudes who mess around and like, man, they out there and just like living unrepentant lives, getting, going crazy with other people, whatever. And my point is that I think it's something about leadership in this generation that this generation actually gets. This generation, what they want authenticity. They aren't looking for perfection. So what did I say? Parents, if you're a parent, your kids aren't looking for perfection. Here's the thing you got to realize. They already see at times where you're a scammer anyway. They see it. They want to see like, oh, mom and dad can say they're sorry. Mom and dad can admit that because that actually gives them that's not perfection. That's why we need Jesus. So
what do we want to dive a little bit into this idea of gifting, calling? People are born kind of even wanting to even know that, and there's a lot of that, even especially with the rise of social media and all this kind of stuff, of being able to you want to be able to have your moment, your times. And so what do you guys think about, like, how do you do that? How do you begin to identify calling, gifting? What do you guys think?
Good question. First place my mind goes to is always I heard a lot coming up, and you still hear it now, like people saying, I had a calling to go into ministry, or I had a calling to go and be a preacher, pastor. And I used to always be like, man, how do you know? What are some of those things that happen? Because it happens differently it seemed to happen differently for everyone who I came across who said I had that same calling, right? But I think some of it is one, kind of what was mentioned earlier, man, what is it that you already naturally kind of have, what is evidence that you already see, one, I think that'll be in your own, in your relationships that you have now, whether it's in family, friends, wherever it might be, what are some things that people say about you that, hey, you're gifted in this, or say you're gifted in that. And then the other thing is, like, you don't have to put a category on it as far as like, oh, it's going to play out like this then. So when I was getting about the pastor thing, it was like, man, someone might have, man, I really like learning about the Bible, and I really care for people. And then you put, oh, well, that must mean I'm going to be a pastor then. So my other point is, man, letting it develop, so, hey, identify it and then let it develop out, and don't be so quick to say, this is what this means, So pay attention to kind of, hey, what's already there. Something we say here is like, man, what's in your hands already? But kind of like, what's kind of the evidence of people in my relationships that's already here? What they say are things you might see yourself. And then let it play out. It might be what you think it is initially. It might be that, or it might be something else.
Yeah. Go ahead, Trey.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, I think one of the things that I've been kind of thinking about more recently is thinking about Jesus and Peter's relationship, and just this idea that whenever Peter, first off, was called by Jesus, and he was out fishing, and so he had already had the skill set for what he was doing whenever he was fishing. But then throughout the course of Jesus's ministry, Jesus was repeatedly calling out things in Peter, things that he might not have had the self-awareness at that time, but that he gained a growing awareness of. Peter, you're my rock. You're going to be the head of my church. You're doing this. You're going to be a fisher of men. To where eventually, like, by the time he's hit his calling, he's the first pope, first leader of the new Christian church, and he's still fishing, but he's become that like fisher of man. And so I've kind of thought about that, of like this idea of calling. And also that while he was in a relationship with the Creator, he was having that pulled out of him, and stuff was being called. And so it's just like, I don't know, I felt like that's just kind of been a powerful story for me, as I'm still trying to like work out some of what's going on inside of me, of leaning back on that, of like, hey, here's a really good biblical example of this happening with somebody.
Wow, that's a great great story, because again, we talk a lot about, even to as we're recording this, I just got done, speaking to working with the school, Robert F. Smith School, founder BT, his STEAM Academy in Denver. And so our team here was really, working. We're doing a whole mask off, really authentic leadership purpose with their team. And it's interesting because, the whole thing of content and containers, right? So what you just said, Trey, is the idea with Peter. Peter was a fisherman. Mm-hmm. So a lot of the skills as a fisherman were a lot of the skills that Peter used when it actually came to fish for men. Mm-hmm. So that's what goes back to what Pastor Jamie, what I want to add to what Pastor Jamie was even saying was that, man, all of a sudden you're passionate about reading the Bible and serving and helping people. Well, what we have been taught for so long is like, okay, my calling then is to then go into ministry versus the fact that, man, like you're passionate about the Bible, but man, maybe you're like, man, I love to learn. But then I love to learn and to teach people because I care for people. So now all of a sudden you can become that as a school teacher. Use the ability to teach to then care for people. Yep. You know what I'm saying? You can do that in so many different areas. And why is that? Not because you shouldn't go into a certain vocation or go into a certain job. But I think why this matters is because when all of a sudden, what happens when that job, let's say something just happens, all of a sudden, I've seen it happen. People go in ministry and their lives there, and then the economy tanks. Something happens in the church. Pastor does something crazy. Finances aren't handled well, and they get let go. And now they're like, okay, my calling was to be a pastor. And now all of a sudden, they find themselves not pastoring. Yeah. And then what they begin to question is everything about God. And it's like, no, the job was not who you are. Yeah. The thing in you. So listen, you could go work for the government. You can go work for Google. You can work and still pastor people. My father, because this is what got me. My father, who you look at my family lineage, I was thinking about this recently. My great grandfather was a pastor. He was a preacher. My grandfather was a pastor, was a preacher. My father was a coach. I am an entrepreneur, do this stuff, and I pastor and preach. But when I look at my father's life, if you ever ask him, I was sitting there on my dad, I was like, why did you stay in coaching? It was never, ever X's and O's, getting this job, whatever. He's like, what always kept me in it were the kids. Did I feel like I had the ability to help change their lives, to take care of them, to help shape them in this most important phase of their life? That was all about. I'm like, literally, it's a pastor's heart. Yeah. It was a leader. It was a coming out of him. I'm like, and now it was just in coaching. Yeah. And I'm like, man, and the reason why I'm passionate about that, because I think so many times Jesus followers can miss just the significance of their life and their role and what God has called them to. And it's so precious. It's so sacred before God because it does not have the Christian language around it. And that does not mean, man, we esteem pastors, prophets, teachers, evangelists. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. All of that. We want to lift that up. But at the end of the day, man, we want to lift up the executive director. We want to lift up the executive assistant. We want to lift up that person, that controller working for the government. We want to lift up that engineer or that bookkeeper, because man, as they're doing those skills, it's a sacred calling. So I think it's really super important, man, to look at that, but don't put it in a box that it has to look like this, because if that box gets taken away, then you feel like your calling, your purpose, your meaning in life is taken away, and it's really not.
That the idea of content versus containers is such a powerful concept and illustration, because I mean, even through like the Nehemiah Institute, what people are starting to get and understand is all my calling I can do from anywhere. I can do it wherever I'm at. And so the idea where, Pat can probably rattle off the statistics of people who are not satisfied with what they do. Every day you wake up, man, you're not satisfied with your job.
20%.
And just imagine what it could, this idea, but just imagine if you were like, no, I can actually flourish in whatever I'm doing, because I don't need it to look like, to what your point, I don't need it to actually look like this. I can still fulfill it. For me, I think a lot of times it's like when we say around here, in community, how do you find gifted calling? It's definitely community. One of the things I want to ask you guys is this, because maybe I'm off the rails here, but like one of the things I've seen is like, I want to say healthy comparison. As I'm around other healthy people, I'm actually able to see where my limitations are, and I can actually see someone's giftedness, because there's this idea that when you step into gifting and calling, it just gets better. It just what it is. And I'm like, I'm watching people do. I'm like, I could never do that. You know what I mean? And it has sobered me. It has made me so much more confident in what I can do just by the healthy comparison of like, no, I cannot. I don't care how much I try. I cannot get to the root of stuff in mission like Pastor Jamie does. Mm-hmm. I cannot generate the momentum that that Pat can create. Mm-hmm. I cannot do that for Trey. Like I don't like that idea of people like being able to respond out of that just almost and because I don't necessarily believe in like I don't know if I believe in like natural born leadership, but there is a gift of leadership that Trey has, and I'm like, okay, I can't work with that. I have to lead in a different way. I can't do that. And so that's been really helpful. I don't know what y'all think about just really healthy because I can see how it can go real bad, you know, like compare yourself to like I get that, but if you can get in a healthy environment and you are self-aware yourself, it can do wonders for you. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, that brings up I don't know if you guys watch The Chosen. So if you don't know The Chosen, it's a TV series around the life of Jesus whenever he was doing his mission here and with the disciples. So in season 2, there's an episode where Jesus is healing people. And, you know, there's a line of people, he's just kind of like, they're coming into him and it's healing. And the disciples are kind of like organizing it, you know, making sure that the people are standing in line, they got what they need and things like that. And there's a scene in there where Thomas is talking to Philip, I think. And Thomas is asking Philip, he's asking him like, hey, how do you feel about this? Like, Jesus is healing these people and you're actually hurt as well. Like he had like his back or something something was ailing him. And the response that Philip gave Thomas was one of, it came from a place of like security. It came from a place of like, Philip having an understanding of like, man, this necessarily isn't about me being healed, but it's about, you know, Jesus' name being known and like what he's doing here. And Philip having that revelation helped Thomas in that moment of understanding like, oh, it's not necessarily about the healing, like what Jesus can do. It's actually about just being near him and being close. And the fact that Philip had been walking with Jesus, you know, and he was close to him, that's the satisfaction that his soul desires, not necessarily being physically healed. And Thomas was getting that revelation from Philip having that. And so it's, so I think it's a great thing to do, like, hey, being able to compare, like, man, this person is healthy in this area, or this person has this skill set, and then realizing like, man, I'm not there. So it might be something that it helps bring revelation and awareness to where you're at. And I might need to grow here. I might need to grow there. Not necessarily be like this person, but to have a greater sense of wholeness, awareness, and fulfillment.
No, I think that was an amazing point. And one of the things too, as people are doing that, I think it's just as important also to realize what the unhealthy side looks like, because it's so easy to be able to see somebody that has a skill set that, say, for example, somebody who's a very charismatic speaker who can get a crowd of people around them. Like that is a gift that a lot of people want. And so some people can look at that and say, oh, I don't have that. I'm not as good of a leader as them. I don't have these strengths. And they'll end up in a place of just like shame, and they'll start to resent it. And then if you start to look at like, oh, well, since I can't do that, I can't live out of my calling, so I'm resenting where I'm at. I'm not happy with where I'm working. There's all of this, versus just being curious and compassionate about like, hey, I don't have that, but if I trust that God is good, and I trust that he's given all of us gifts, that I can look inward, or I can ask, and maybe by virtue of comparison, I can realize, hey, I'm not good at that, but I am good at this. That kind of thing.
Yeah, no, I think, listen, I think healthy comparison is really good. And I'm going to say this, and I'm going to say the word, but I think healthy competition is good. And here's what I mean by competition. See, not competition. See, I think we have to kind of reshape how competition is seen. See, a lot of times in what we see in competition today, it's like somebody has, I'm going to go take. you have something I want, I'm going to go take that from you, right? Versus competition being, no, we both have whatever we have, but like, no, but we're going to push each other to be the best and have that healthy comparison. So here's an example of that. Is that I think like comparison, like I get around and I'll sit here and I'll listen to, both like Pastor Jamie and Pastor Derek, and pastorally, I'll listen to you guys start to talk and like, hey, about like, listen, digging a little bit deeper into what's going on with somebody, like, hey, kind of slowly walking them through it. And it challenges me to like want to be better. So I see that. I'm like, so like when I watch you guys something, I'm like, oh, no. Like, like it pulls me up. When I get around some of my friends and like I get around like, somebody being on our pod too, like Adam Mabry, Adam's so smart. You get around Adam all of a sudden, man, it's like you get around Adam, like it challenges me, though I will never intellectually be at the level as far as what Adam can understand and what he does with certain things. But what it does do is it challenges me to keep trying to get better, but not where I'm like, oh man, all of a sudden I'm stopping everything. I'm going to try to go learn Greek and do all stuff like that. No. But what it does make me do is it does go to like, cause which we could easily do is just start saying, well, that's just him. And that's what means I don't want to learn. Like, no, I still want to learn. Like, I want to get, it challenges me to get better. And I hope it does the same thing. I mean, when I get around my friends, I hope it challenges them to like, my friends always tell me, like, man, I get around you. It's like, you challenge me to this idea of living out of like, who you really are, and it inspires me to be like, oh no, I can go chase this, because they see me chase after things in a healthy way, not in the like, man, this today's world of like, go out there and be your own best self and do whatever you want to do. Like, no, they see me like under the lordship of Jesus and all stuff, but like also like, yeah, God's given me a calling, and like he talked about, Pastor James said about Coach Bowden, like, yeah, at the end of my life, I'm gonna have to give an account to God for the life that I lived. I ain't give an account for somebody else. So if I'm gonna go out the way God told me to, like what he told me to do. So when, it's that whole thing, I do think it's out there with Frank Sinatra. I did it my way, right? I think Frank Sinatra, now again, that's out of a humanistic, hey, I want to do it my own. But when I literally say I'm doing it my way, I really mean like, no, I'm doing what God has called me to do. And I'm going out that way. I don't care what society says. And you know what? And at the end of the day, I'm going to bet on that, because at the end, regardless of how I look in your eyes, if God says this is what I'm supposed to do, I've got to trust that there's something of greater significance long term that he's going to do. Even if I don't win in what your eyes say that may be winning, but there may be something I'm just building a layer for the next generation and stuff like that. It's
an interesting thing, because when we talked about leadership renovation the other day, what you were saying is kind of what we're the opposite of what we're talking about right now. Of there are people in our life that we pass up working with, partnering with, even being in close relationship with, because they have their own way of, they're different than us, basically. How do you identify, like, man, those type of people? How do you identify, like, man, the people I need to get around me, even though they might be different than me, or better yet, what's stopping us from doing that? What is it that is in us? We're like, man, okay, I don't want to work with this person because I feel this type of way about them in their leadership or whatever.
Because because it's been a challenge. Let me say this. The reason why I want to speak to it, because that's one thing the last couple of years that I really felt led to, is that I had hit my cap leading myself. Like, I'd hit my cap. Like, to a lot of people, I did some good things, but I realized there was a whole nother level. So that's why I hired someone who's worked at like a $1 billion level, and I hired them. I am now in certain corporate spaces. So the people I'm in and here's why. Well, here's why I think we don't do that. We don't do it is because many times we think it's a reflection of who we are when you're around other people who are better. It takes security to be around other people like, you're just better than I am. Right. Like, it just takes a lot of security. You know what I'm saying? Like I said, I get around I got people I'm around sometimes. I'm like, man, they are just incredible at this. And I'm like, and you're like, man, I don't even know. And what's hard sometimes, here's the real hard thing. When you get around somebody who's incredible at what they do, you know what you do, and you do that really well. But what they do it better. They do their thing at a higher level than you do your thing. And that takes some security with people, because now all of a sudden, like all of a sudden you want to start tearing them down. You want to start tearing them because of this and da. So I think most people don't want to do it because of what it makes us feel. But when you actually, let me tell you this, over the last couple of years being in different rooms, man, I am a way more effective leader because I get in rooms and I'm like, you know what it forced me to do? It forced me to be way more prepared. Because that's what I tell people. I can walk in a lot of rooms and I can pretty much out leadership anybody in that room. So the danger about out leadershiping people in the room, you don't have to prepare for it. It makes you become lazy. Now, when you go in rooms, and there's certain rooms I'm walking in now with like multi-million billion who are leading global companies and like where they have to all this stuff like that. You go in a room, it's forced of having me. I'm fully prepared because like the questions I get asked in that room are not stuff that you got to know your stuff before you ever walk in that room. And it's made me even better as a leader because after a while, it's kind of like, playing. After a while, you're like, if you ever play with people who are like, as good as what you are, you know what I'm saying? It just does something. I don't know. I don't know if that makes sense.
What you're saying is, hey, in order to have leadership renovation, some of it is you have to have the people around you that you need to actually grow. That's going to influence you to grow, and those people oftentimes are probably going to be better. Better at you.
Well, think about Olympic sprinters. We're going to the Olympics. Olympic sprinters don't train by themselves. They train with other people. Yeah. We look at it. I mean, like, coming up, you train back. Why? You have a bad day. Johnny ain't having a bad day. So either you figure it out or you get drowned. And so you're like, so you know what it does? When you train by yourself, a bunch of coaches want to yell at you or train with but when you out there, now, listen, we used to play and you playing one-on-one and we used to play one-on-one full court and you out there guarding somebody, it's like, listen, and again, and the way we came up, it was like, you heard it too. It's like, listen, it was too competitive. And I'll never forget this. I'll say this. I'll never forget. I watched this. And this is when we talk about getting better. So JT, who is our, who serves our ship director here. JT, went on, he played high level college basketball. I'll never forget when JT made a real turn. JT trained and he trained with a guy by the name of Al Thornton and a guy by the name of Xavier Rattan-Mays. Xavier Rattan-Mays was one of the top 30 players in the country, like 2 years older than JT. Al Thornton was a lottery pick in the NBA draft. So the rabbit that X was chasing was Al. JT was chasing X. They would go in there. JT's senior year, I'll never forget this. They would be in the gym, and I'm talking about it would be us three in the gym, and watching them literally punished. I mean, they crucified JT every day. And here's what was happening. JT may score 1 point. They want and killing him. But you know what happened? He'd be in there at 11 o'clock working day. The next day or that night, he had a high school game. What you think he did to them high school kids? It was get back. I mean, he was down. JT was on like, because why? He took all that pain. My point is this. There's something about when you are competing at a level with other people, because then when you get to the level, you lead better. Now, I use athletics as an example, but when you get in a higher level, then when you get back down to your level of what you're leading, you lead better. Man, get around parents who are better. Get around parents who got older kids who you look like, man, I like what y'all did there. Get around them. That doesn't mean you got to lead like them, but man, they make you better because you start getting around and like, dude, I am not patient with my kids at all. Man, I don't know if that makes any sense.
Yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense to me. And as you shift it kind of to like the internal character things, as far as like leadership and stuff like that takes me to whenever I was in college. And one of the things that drew me to someone was when I would see like the level of character that they had, and specifically stuff that like I desired to have, but like didn't have. So like, for example, one would be like one of my friends in college, he was, same type of guy as me, obviously, on the football team, there playing, kind of same similar background growing up, but, he'd like to hang out, go out to clubs and things like that, but he didn't drink and didn't smoke. And people that were like that always interested me. 'Cause I'm like, how can I be in these environments and not be influenced by that? And so I was like, I wanted to be around them, so I wanted to be around it. And what I found out was they had a level of security, or they had what we call around here like non-negotiables, some things that they did not compromise for themselves. So a lot of guys you come across that they'll be like, I don't smoke, I don't drink because I seen what it did to someone in my family. Because and like for them to take that and still carry that no matter what environment that they were in, no matter what type of people and influence that they had that they were around, they were like, I'm not compromising that. That was something that was attractive to me. Or they were like, no, I don't smoke or drink because it's just not something I want to do, and I'm just secure in that. But I can still be in these places. I can still be around and not really have an influence. But I still feel like I can relate and talk and hang out with you guys. So that was something that was always attractive to me.
And me too. And because Pastor, when we started, you were asking us when we did the Leadership Renovation talk, like what was it about that was, and for me that was it. What hit me so hard was my identity. And how I could be affected, even in my leadership, thinking, "Oh, I'm work here. Oh, I'm supposed to be that. I got to be like this leader. Oh, now I work here. Okay, now I got to be like this leader." And so it's like, man, what's actually happening when that's going on for a person? What's actually happening when a person is like, we're saying, yeah, no, competition is healthy, comparison is healthy. You need to get around people who are better than you. But oftentimes, what's happening is you start to take on other people's leadership, and imitation is great for a second. But what's actually going on internally for the person like myself was just like, oh, that must be the way to do it, because I see the effectiveness, and my leadership got to be like this, even if my character is not like that. And I remember trying to like pull off some pack type stuff in some meetings and like, okay, this does not work. I cannot do that. I clearly cannot do that. So what's going on, man? Because people are doing that all the time.
But you know what though? But here's what I would tell you. I think it's, like imitation, imitation actually many times can lead to like innovation and more things. But here's what I think it comes down to. It's why. Because if you don't know, you don't know, right? So you're just like, man, okay, well, who's somebody that maybe like, so when they were early on preaching, I was like, okay, who's somebody who like, man, I feel like I may have someone around, okay, this guy, okay, and I would go and man, try to mimic and okay, they didn't do this, so how do I do this? And da. And so, like Andy Stanley, man, if you like, listen to Andy Stanley, man, it's like watching Tiger Woods swing a golf club when he preaches. So Andy Stanley, man, he got 1 point and and he short thread that thing. Y'all know me, I'm so ADD, I'm all over the place. So I'm like, man, I'm gonna be like Andy Stanley. I'm like, all right, man. I'm like over here, like you said, I'm over here trying to do something, pull a hamstring over here trying to be like Andy Stanley. You know what I'm saying? My 1 point, I'm like over there. Then on top of it, I'm trying to do the 1 point like Andy, very clear. I'm like so bored. Like I'm like, man, it's dumb, whatever. And none of my passion would come out. But I think it's part of self-discovery. And it's okay to look at a leader and say, man, I mean, I'll tell people, it's okay to like grab from other leaders. Man, what fits me? Okay, that's great. Let me take that. Or let me throw that away. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just the fact, I think what we'll tend to do is like, I think what we want their fruit. We want their fruit, but we don't really want the process of it. We want their fruit. And when I tell people, man, listen, you can imitate somebody, but there's no guarantee that you got the skill set to get the fruit of what they have. But and let me tell you, also in the fruit that you, the harvest or the things that you go do, the results you get, like not everybody's harvest is going to be equal. And that's okay. You know what I'm saying? Like it's just not. And so like, I think that's really important. I think the last thing I'll say, and I know we're going to kind of come to a close, is that the one thing I want to tell, one of the renovations I've been thinking a lot about, man, I was actually watching a video the other night. I like to go back. I mean, again, playing with Kobe, I love like, man, one of my favorite parts about Kobe was at the end of Kobe's, like when he got out of playing, was a lot of the interviews because like, after like, man, he just was able to like, one thing I think that's what was so sad when he passed was because the actual like reflection that Kobe started having, like, thinking about things, talking about, man, when I was playing with Shaq and I should have been better here. That's one thing I loved about him. And I want to say this, you may be wondering, man, we've pulled a lot of different things out. Not everything we've talked about is this idea that comes directly from like the gospel, whatever. So if you're listening to this and wondering, I think, listen, like Christians don't have like, let me just be really clear. Like we don't own the market on like truth. Like truth is like, you can find truth anywhere. You know what I'm saying? Like trust me, there's a lot of people using biblical truths to do things that you can learn. But one of the things that Kobe said, and I think it's something I think for every leader needs to have, because it's this tension, is I was watching him the other day, and it's this legendary thing. I don't know if you guys ever seen it, where he was talking at the University of Alabama. And he's talking at the University of Alabama, and at the University of Alabama, dude, he talked about how every night he lined up against somebody, right? He lined up against them, played against them. He's like, I wanted them to rethink their life choices. I heard that. I was like, yo.
Not leave the game sore.
I want
to think life.
I want them to think about, like, should I be playing basketball?
Right. I was going to say, he's talking about, should I even play the game of basketball?
And here's what I say. You may be wondering, okay, where am I going with this? This is what I mean by that. I think one of the things that has to start happening among Jesus followers is what you heard him say in that moment. There has to become a tenacity about what it is that God's called you to. See, Kobe, even though it was about basketball being the absolute best, all that stuff like that, and I'm not saying, that was his life. What I'm trying to say is this. If God has called us, like right now in this moment, right, to go out there to like unlock authenticity for launch innovative, right, whatever your thing is, whatever collectively the church body you're a part of, but also in your life, man, to go out there and it should matter. It should matter to you when you're saying, no, God has called me. So when I think about this, in my life right now, I'm thinking about every time, like today, I'm speaking to these 20 school teachers who are going to be impacting these 80, this new school. When I went on there, I literally walked into that meeting today saying like this, and I said this myself, there's nobody on God's planet better than me to do this. And that's not me in some false thing, but here's the reason why I want to be committed, because I want to say, I'm going to bring I was prepared, I'm going to bring my absolute best to these people. I want to do the best job I can, because you know what? These 20 teachers, they can get it. They about to impact 80 kids, and them 80 kids going to impact that. And we're going to unlock more authenticity because that's what God's called me to. And the idea that whatever that mission is, God's church, man, making disciples, going, reaching, dude, we have got to get a tenacity back in God's church, but not a tenacity of being a tenacity, not being an a-hole or just saying harsh stuff. But man, no, what we're doing matters. Yeah. What you're doing, raising those kids matters. And when I talk about that tenacity now in here, it's not that feeling, oh man, my kid's messed up, man, and you're up all night. No, but it's that, but I will tell you this. There needs to be a tenacity. Maybe your kids are struggling. And you know what? That made me that sometimes, man, no, I'm going to stay up every night for an extra hour to war and pray over my children. Yeah. Like that's a tenacity. No, listen, because I tell you what, the devil ain't stopping. Mm-hmm. So it's a tenacity to pray over them. My friend, man, they're not really getting it and whatever. No, is there a tenacity to say no? Because here's what he says. I mean, literally, it's a person begging. Mm-hmm. Like you keep knocking. And I think so many times we stop. And because we're like, well, I asked for it one time and da-da-da. No, I think what God's wanting to do, okay, like, does it really matter to you? Does it really matter? Because if I told you all of a sudden, if we said, God said, you got to knock on his door 500 times in order to get this $5 million, you're going to keep knocking on the door. You know what I'm saying? But it matters. And I'm going to say that to you. If you go to work, it matters. Yeah. Your work matters. Like, don't go to work and be the one that's not getting your stuff done. That matters. That matters in the kingdom. Here's why. It's because, man, what you do everything as you do it unto the Lord. That matters. Yeah. It matters that, man, if your kids are struggling, no, I'm not here. Like, man, begin the war. Call people. Hey, we got to do this. Man, you're struggling with stuff. Begin to war. You're struggling with your mental health. I know how hard that is, but you know what you got to do? You got to begin the war. You got to begin to say, man, what's my practices in order to get mentally and emotionally healthy? I got to war for that. It's not okay to not get up and to not do my practices in order to do that. And I think a tenacity has to come back into God's people. And I think we miss it because we think it's, oh man, if we do that, that's not being Christ-like. Mm-hmm. I'm like, man, last time I read my Bible, like, I just don't serve a God who didn't have a tenacity about him. You know how tenacious it was to say to God, I don't want to go to this cross, but not my will, but yours be done. To know what you're about. Listen, I don't care about the level about the suffering and death and just the obliteration of his body to say, but no, these people matter. Yeah. Mm-hmm. That's what I'm saying. So that's when I say this, I'm not saying this in some American macho machismo type of thing. I'm saying this from a biblical Christian perspective. There's a toughness about walking this life. If you don't believe me, take up your cross and follow me. That's not one of them situations where oh, hey, take up your cross. I was like, man, walking around and like drink coffee and read my Bible in the morning. No, you know what it says? Man, fight, you fail, get up. Keep fighting. And so I want to encourage all you out there, part of Leadership Renovation, man, this is toughness. That a spiritual toughness has to begin to rise in this church. And that's one of the things I'm really passionate about, trying to figure out how do we help people get that in a right, healthy way going forward. Well, guys, hey, we appreciate that. Here's what I'm going to encourage you. As you go and as we talk about leadership renovation, here's what we want you to do. Examine. Matter of fact, begin to examine and look at your life and see this. Matter of fact, I'm going to give you 3 points again, or really 4 points I gave our team the other day. And again, examine, man, look at the floor plan, where things at, man, begin to gut, man, that's like, you got to go and start gutting it. And then you know what? And as you take all the stuff out, begin to start building. The things you want to add, begin to start building. And so, man, until next time, we'll be back with you soon on Street Theology.